Section 1. The First Days Alone, Silence and Survival. The first days after all other humans have vanished would be both surreal and strangely serene. Imagine opening your eyes to a world without the ordinary hum of human activity. No cars on the streets, no distant chatter, no industrial hums. The silence would feel both oppressive and liberating, a reminder of the life once taken for granted. For the last human, the immediate challenge would be practical survival. But the mental adjustment, adapting to absolute solitude, would be just as profound. The initial concern would be food and water. Supermarkets and homes would be stocked for weeks, perhaps months, offering an abundance of supplies for the first solitary days. Fresh produce would spoil quickly, but canned goods, dry grains, and preserved foods would become the mainstay. Water systems, powered by electricity, might continue functioning for a brief period, but within days, the lack of maintenance would begin to shut down pumps and filtration systems. Rivers, lakes, and rainwater would then become essential sources of drinking water, prompting the last human to rely on primitive methods like boiling, filtration, or collecting dew. A slow, meditative rhythm replacing the hurried routines of pre-human society. Transportation would initially seem straightforward. Roads, bridges, and railways would remain intact, and vehicles left behind could provide temporary mobility. Gasoline, however, would begin to degrade, and electric systems could fail as power plants shut down. The last human might find themselves walking more, relying on the natural rhythm of the body rather than mechanical assistance. This shift from dependence on machines to reliance on one's own physical abilities would be both challenging and grounding. Every step would carry a sense of connection to the world, as though rediscovering movement in its purest form. Safety would take on a new dimension. Without humans to maintain infrastructure, hazards would occur quickly. Power lines might spark, dams could fail, and buildings, without routine inspection, could start to collapse. For the last human, survival would not only be about nourishment, but about navigating a slowly deteriorating environment. Even so, in these first days, the decay would be slow enough to offer a sense of calm exploration, a chance to observe a city in transition, to watch pigeons reclaim plazas and squirrels dominate quiet streets. Psychologically, the adjustment would be profound. Humans are social creatures, deeply wired for companionship. Without contact, the last human might create routines, speaking aloud to themselves or naming objects to retain a sense of community. This practice, though unusual, would serve as a mental anchor, helping to maintain cognitive function and emotional stability. In the first days, there might even be a sense of wonder, the unusual peace, the way sunlight reflects off empty streets, the soft rustling of leaves in areas once bustling with life. In the absence of human noise, the sounds of the natural world, birdsong, the patter of rain, the rustle of wind, would become overwhelmingly clear, as if the planet itself were slowly exhaling. Animals would begin their cautious exploration. Domesticated pets, if still alive, might view the last human as the sole source of food and comfort. dogs and cats would gradually adjust to a new hierarchy of interaction, while wild animals would test the boundaries of spaces once crowded by humans. Deer could wander into parks, birds might nest in traffic signals, and rodents would reclaim alleyways. Observing these changes would be both fascinating and educational, a living demonstration of how ecosystems respond when human presence vanishes overnight. Waste management, an unseen cornerstone of civilization, would immediately become an issue. Without collection, trash would accumulate, attracting insects and scavengers. Yet even here, nature would begin its slow work of decomposition. Food scraps, paper, and wood would break down under microbial and insect activity, forming a cycle of renewal. The last human might witness firsthand the astonishing efficiency of decomposition and the way natural systems reclaim materials almost instantly when left to themselves. The first days would also reveal the fragility of human infrastructure. Electricity, water, gas, systems that rely on continual human operation would begin to falter in a predictable pattern. Refrigeration would fail, lights would go dark, and elevators would stop functioning. In this, the last human would gain an intimate understanding of how dependent civilization is on constant maintenance. Yet, the experience would also cultivate a deep sense of resilience, forcing the individual to engage directly with the elements, to cook over fire, collect water, and navigate landscapes without technological assistance. Emotionally, the first days would be a mix of awe and solitude-induced tension. There would be moments of profound appreciation, watching a deserted playground swing gently in the wind, seeing a flock of birds take over a city square, hearing water ripple through an abandoned fountain. Yet, the absence of other humans could bring a palpable sense of isolation, anxiety, and existential reflection. Writing, sketching, or documenting observations might become crucial, a way to externalize thoughts and maintain a sense of continuity with human culture, even in solitude. Interestingly, the last human's perception of time would begin to shift. Without social cues such as traffic schedules, television, or work routines, time might feel slower, more cyclical. Days would be marked by the sun's passage, the sound of rain, and the growth of plants reclaiming streets and parks. This natural rhythm could bring a sense of calm, allowing a deeper attunement to the environment and fostering an intimate connection with the planet's cycles. Even in these initial days, subtle hints of long-term changes would begin to appear. Without humans to control them, plants would start to overgrow sidewalks, roots would crack through asphalt, and insects and small mammals would expand into areas once dominated by human activity. The last human would witness the beginning of a slow, inevitable reclamation, a quiet process of nature reasserting itself. Ultimately, the first days alone would be a delicate balance between immediate survival and wonder. The challenge would be both practical, securing food, water, and shelter, and psychological, adapting to silence, solitude, and a world uninhabited by other humans. Yet it would also be an opportunity, a chance to observe Earth in its natural state, unmediated by human intervention, and to experience the planet's resilience firsthand. The first days are the threshold between familiar life and extraordinary solitude, a period where the last human begins to understand both the fragility and the persistence of civilization and the quiet power of the natural world. Section 2. Weeks alone, adapting to a human-free world. After the initial days of solitude, the first few weeks would bring the last human into a deeper rhythm of adaptation. The novelty of silence would begin to settle into reality, a world entirely uninhabited by others, where every decision, every movement, and every meal is shaped by necessity. Survival would become a daily practice, but it would also reveal profound insights into the balance between human ingenuity and the natural systems quietly reclaiming the planet. Food would remain the primary concern. The first day's supply of canned goods and dry foods would steadily dwindle. Fresh vegetables and fruits left in homes or markets would spoil quickly. Yet some foraging would become possible in the early weeks. Urban landscapes, though initially dominated by asphalt and concrete, contain small patches of resilience. Garden plots, potted plants, ornamental trees, and even patches of grass between sidewalks. Birds, insects, and animals thriving in these spaces would offer a subtle guide to edible plants, seeds, and berries. Observation, patience, and trial would become essential skills, transforming grocery shopping into an exercise in environmental awareness and self-reliance. Water would follow a similar pattern of diminishing security. Municipal systems, reliant on electricity, would gradually fail as generators shut down and reservoirs lose pumping capacity. Wells might still provide clean water, but maintenance would fall entirely to the last human. Rivers, streams, and rainfall would become critical sources, and methods of purification would shift from convenience to necessity. Boiling, sediment filtering, and solar distillation might become daily practices, embedding a meditative quality in the simple act of collecting water. Every sip would carry a newfound awareness of the connection between survival and Earth's natural cycles. Shelter, too, would require adaptation. Initially, homes, apartments, and even office buildings would offer comfort and security. Yet the degradation of utilities, electricity, plumbing, heating, would force the last human to modify these structures. Windows might be reinforced to prevent leaks, rainwater collected for practical use, and fireplaces or stoves utilized for cooking and warmth. This process would be gradual, intimate, and deeply observational, turning each day into an exercise in understanding how built spaces interact with natural forces. The human-made world would no longer function as intended. Instead, it would become a canvas for adaptation and ingenuity. Movement across the landscape would also change. Initially reliant on abandoned vehicles, the last human might begin to walk longer distances, discovering paths through parks, forests, and streets. The absence of traffic would allow new forms of exploration, cycling freely, crossing bridges without fear, and navigating cities that would normally be congested. The once familiar urban environment would slowly transform into a living laboratory where nature and abandoned infrastructure interact. Squirrels, deer, and birds would reclaim spaces formerly dominated by people, creating new patterns of life that the last human would observe with both fascination and care. Animals would begin to adjust to this prolonged human absence. Pets might become semi-feral, forming small groups or returning to instinct-driven behaviors. Wild animals would expand their territories, exploring parks, backyards, and streets, as if gradually reasserting ownership of the land. Birds might nest in lampposts and traffic signals, raccoons in abandoned attics, and foxes in overgrown gardens. The last human would witness these interactions up close, experiencing a world where the boundaries between domesticated and wild blur, revealing the resilience and adaptability of life when human influence disappears. The mental landscape of solitude would deepen during these weeks. The initial shock of silence would give way to reflection. Without social distractions, attention would turn inward and outward simultaneously. Journaling, sketching, or documenting observations would become essential not only for maintaining mental clarity, but also as a way of creating a narrative of existence. Daily routines would acquire a meditative quality, transforming ordinary tasks into exercises in mindfulness. Collecting water, preparing food, or observing animal behavior would no longer feel like chores, but rituals, connecting the last human to the rhythms of the earth in ways rarely experienced in populated societies. Sleep and time would also shift. Without artificial lighting or social schedules, the circadian rhythm would align more closely with natural patterns, sunrise and sunset, temperature fluctuations, and seasonal changes. Nights might feel longer or emptier, with the absence of human-generated noise, emphasizing the subtle sounds of the environment. Wind rustling through trees, distant waterfalls, or nocturnal animals communicating. Time would become fluid, measured not in hours and minutes, but in sunrises, moon cycles, and the slow transformation of nature around the abandoned settlements. Infrastructural decay would become increasingly visible. Traffic signals would fail, streetlights would darken, and roads would begin to crack under the weight of weather and vegetation. Roofs might leak, and wooden structures could begin to rot. Even so, these changes would unfold slowly, offering the last human a unique opportunity to observe the gradual return of Earth's dominance. Each broken fence, each overgrown path, each collapsing building would tell a story of resilience and reclamation, a reminder that the planet's natural systems continue to operate even in the absence of human intervention. As weeks pass, the last human would also notice ecological feedback in unexpected ways. The reduction of human activity would allow bird populations to increase, small mammals to spread, and plant life to flourish in previously inhospitable urban environments. The interplay of light, water, and nutrients in these spaces would create microhabitats rich with biodiversity, providing both sustenance and aesthetic delight. Observing this resurgence would instill a calm appreciation for the planet's adaptive capacity, revealing a world that is both delicate and astonishingly robust. By the end of these early weeks, the last human would find themselves transformed, not just physically, but psychologically and emotionally. Survival would remain a concern, but it would be accompanied by profound reflection on the transient nature of civilization, the enduring rhythms of the natural world, and the intricate interplay between life, decay, and renewal. In the silence left behind by humanity, the planet's quiet pulse becomes audible, revealing the extraordinary resilience of ecosystems once hidden beneath the bustle of human activity. The last human is no longer simply surviving. They are witnessing Earth in its purest form, a slow unfolding story of reclamation, balance, and serene transformation. Section 3. Months alone. Nature reclaims urban spaces. As the weeks turn into months, the world of the last human would shift in ways that are both subtle and extraordinary. The initial novelty of abandoned streets and silent cities would give way to a deeper awareness. Life continues, even thrives when human activity ceases. Urban spaces, once dominated by concrete, asphalt, and steel, would begin their slow transformation back into natural landscapes, a process both fascinating and meditative for the sole observer of this quiet revolution. Vegetation would be among the first indicators of nature's return. Within months, small plants would sprout in the tiniest cracks of sidewalks, between bricks, and along the edges of roads. Grasses and mosses, previously suppressed by foot traffic and pollution, would gradually carpet plazas and parking lots. Trees in parks and along streets would grow unchecked, their roots prying apart sidewalks and roads. The last human would witness the incredible persistence of life in these small details, observing how even the smallest seeds can exploit opportunities when humans are no longer a controlling force. Animal life would flourish alongside this botanical reclamation. Without people to drive cars, hunt, or otherwise interfere, birds would begin nesting in traffic lights, rooftops, and abandoned balconies. Squirrels, raccoons, and foxes would explore new territories, taking advantage of urban gardens and vacant homes for shelter. Larger mammals, such as deer or coyotes, might venture into cities once considered uninhabitable. The last human could observe a new kind of coexistence, where wildlife begins to reorganize and occupy spaces that humans once monopolized, creating micro-ecosystems that evolve in real time. The decay of human infrastructure would become more apparent over these months. Pavements would crack, buildings would lose windows, and paint would peel from walls exposed to wind, rain, and temperature fluctuations. Roofs might start to sag under the weight of accumulated debris, while pipes burst and water systems fail entirely. At first, these changes might seem alarming, but over time, they would reveal a profound truth. The materials humans leave behind are transient, and nature patiently reclaims them, reshaping them into something entirely new. Water systems would also undergo dramatic changes. With pumps and filtration no longer operational, rivers, streams, and rainfall would define the distribution of water. Puddles would collect in streets, creating temporary wetlands for insects and amphibians. Underground pipes could erode or burst, releasing water into forgotten channels and transforming basements into small aquatic habitats. The last human would begin to understand water in a new, intimate way, not as a resource delivered on demand, but as a living system that interacts dynamically with the environment. The psychological landscape during these months would be complex. The last human might feel both awe and solitude, a simultaneous appreciation for nature's beauty and the weight of absolute isolation. To navigate this, daily routines would become critical: collecting water, securing food, monitoring weather, and observing animal activity. These routines would provide structure and a sense of purpose, allowing the individual to find calm in predictability while remaining deeply connected to the ever-changing environment around them. Observation would also yield scientific insights. Over just a few months, The pace of ecological succession in urban spaces would become evident. Pioneer species, grasses, weeds, and hardy shrubs would establish themselves first, followed by bushes and small trees. Bird and insect populations would adapt to new food sources and habitats. Even microbial life would respond to changing conditions, breaking down organic matter and enriching soils. The last human could witness, in real time, the processes that normally take decades in cities with human populations, turning mundane observation into a form of intimate research. Fire would also play a subtle role in these early months. Sparks from electrical faults or dry debris might ignite small fires in abandoned buildings or overgrown lots. Without firefighting systems, such blazes could spread, clearing underbrush and creating new patches for plants to grow. These natural disturbances would accelerate ecological succession, demonstrating that even destruction can catalyze renewal, a quiet lesson in balance, where every process contributes to a dynamic, evolving ecosystem. The sensory world would also change. Without the constant noise of humans, sounds of wildlife and natural phenomena would become pronounced. Birdsong, rustling leaves, flowing water, and the distant calls of mammals would dominate the soundscape. Even the sense of smell would shift. The scent of decomposing vegetation, wet soil, and blooming plants would replace exhaust fumes and industrial odors. The last human would experience the city as a living, breathing organism rather than a static collection of buildings. A world where life is no longer measured by human schedules, but by the rhythms of nature. The passage of months would also reveal subtle weathering effects on the built environment. Acid rain, frost, and wind erosion would gradually wear down concrete and asphalt. Windows might shatter due to thermal expansion and contraction, allowing birds and small mammals to enter previously inaccessible spaces. Rooftops could collapse, releasing trapped debris and creating new habitats for plants and animals. In this slow, almost imperceptible process, the last human would observe the transient nature of human construction, while appreciating the persistence and adaptability of natural systems. Socially, the human need for connection would remain unmet, yet this void could be filled by an extraordinary awareness of other forms of life. Animals would become companions in the broadest sense. Dogs and cats might follow or seek attention, while birds could become familiar presences in daily routines. The last human might even develop a sense of communication with animals, reading their behaviors as a form of interaction, fostering a quiet relationship that bridges the absence of human society. By the end of the first few months, the last human would have developed a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of life. Urban landscapes, once rigidly organized for human convenience, would begin to follow natural patterns of growth, decay, and adaptation. The individual would witness ecosystems emerging in places where they had been suppressed, and the quiet yet relentless reclaiming of space by plants and animals would offer a profound lesson. Earth's systems continue even without humans, and life in its many forms persists. In this stage, survival becomes less a frantic struggle and more a mindful practice. The last human learns to read the land, anticipate changes, and live within the rhythms of a world that no longer revolves around human activity. The city, once a monument to human achievement, transforms into a living laboratory of adaptation, renewal, and coexistence. In these months alone, the last human begins not only to survive, but to witness a rare and beautiful story, the planet reclaiming its spaces, quietly, patiently, and inexorably. Section 4. The first year alone. Long-term environmental changes. As the first year of solitude unfolds, the last human on Earth would begin to witness a transformation that extends beyond the immediate recovery of nature into profound, long-term environmental changes. With human activity reduced to zero, Earth's systems, forests, rivers, wildlife populations, and even climate-sensitive processes would begin a remarkable shift toward equilibrium, one that would slowly reclaim the spaces once dominated by human influence. Cities, once bustling with life, would continue their slow decay. Pavement cracks would widen, allowing weeds, mosses, and grasses to sprout and spread. Sidewalks and roads would fracture under pressure from growing roots, and abandoned vehicles would become temporary habitats for small animals. Over months, these changes would accumulate, creating microhabitats within urban environments that were previously inhospitable. The last human would witness in real time how resilient and adaptable life is, even in the face of artificial structures designed to resist it. Water systems would reveal some of the most dramatic changes. Without human maintenance, dams, canals, and irrigation systems would gradually fail. Rivers might break free from artificial channels, flooding lowlands and reconnecting with floodplains that had been previously constrained. Ponds and lakes in urban parks could expand as drainage systems fail, providing new habitats for amphibians, insects, and birds. Rainwater and groundwater cycles would begin to dominate, creating dynamic hydrological systems that fluctuate naturally with seasonal changes. The last human could observe these transformations firsthand, noting how the absence of human intervention allows water to flow freely once again across the landscape. Wildlife populations would continue their remarkable resurgence. Small mammals, such as squirrels, raccoons, and rabbits, would become abundant in urban areas, while larger predators, coyotes, foxes, and even bears in some regions, might venture further into towns and cities. Birds would dominate open spaces, nesting on rooftops, streetlights, and in overgrown parks. In the absence of humans, migration patterns could change as birds reclaim routes once interrupted by noise and activity. Ecosystems would slowly rebalance themselves, creating new food webs and interdependent relationships that thrive without interference. Vegetation would also experience profound growth. Trees would mature and spread into previously inaccessible areas, creating shaded corridors through urban landscapes. Grasslands could emerge in plazas, parking lots, and streets, while vines and climbing plants would cover walls and fences. Flowers and shrubs would bloom seasonally, attracting pollinators such as bees, butterflies, and birds. The last human, observing these changes, would notice the way life moves dynamically through space, how sunlight, soil, and water interact to reclaim abandoned structures. The first year would also reveal the early stages of longer-term geological impacts. Without maintenance, erosion would accelerate in some areas, washing away soil from roads, embankments, and unprotected slopes. Sediment would be carried into rivers, changing flow patterns and creating new wetland environments. Crumbling buildings and roofs would deposit debris into streets and parks, creating additional substrates for plant growth. Even the slow processes of weathering, wind, rain, frost, would become visible as natural forces slowly undo the precision of human engineering. Psychologically, the last human would continue adapting to solitude. The absence of social interaction would gradually reshape perception of time and space. Days would be measured not by schedules or appointments, but by light, weather patterns, and seasonal shifts. The human body and mind would begin syncing with these natural rhythms, developing a new sense of connection to the environment. The quiet, repetitive tasks of survival, collecting water, preparing food, exploring, would foster mindfulness and deep awareness of the surrounding world. Even the smallest observation, such as a squirrel navigating an abandoned street or a flower sprouting through asphalt, would carry profound significance. Food acquisition during the first year would require innovation. Stored supplies would be depleted, and the last human would need to forage, hunt, or cultivate small gardens. Urban gardens, previously tended by humans, could provide seeds and plants for cultivation. Fruit trees in parks or backyards might bear edible fruit, and wild animals could become both companions and occasional sources of protein if necessary. This gradual adaptation to self-sufficiency would teach patience, observation, and respect for natural cycles, transforming survival into a sustained, reflective practice. The climate itself could begin to feel different. Without emissions from vehicles, factories, and urban centers, local air quality would improve dramatically. Over time, reductions in pollutants and aerosols could slightly modify weather patterns, creating clearer skies, cleaner rain, and more vibrant seasonal changes. Forested and vegetated areas, now free from human interference, would absorb more carbon dioxide, contributing, albeit modestly, to a natural mitigation of global warming trends. The last human would witness a subtle planetary healing process, one that occurs slowly but persistently in the absence of human activity. Infrastructural decay would continue steadily, revealing how impermanent human constructions are compared to natural systems. Wooden structures would rot, metal would corrode, and concrete would crumble under frost and water intrusion. Abandoned bridges, highways, and buildings would eventually collapse, forming new terrain for plants and animals. Even monumental structures would show early signs of nature's reclamation, reminding the last human that permanence is an illusion and that Earth's forces continue beyond human control. Finally, the first year would deepen the last human's sense of awe and connection to the planet. Observing ecosystems regenerate, water systems reconfigure, and animals reclaim their habitats would provide both solace and inspiration. The world would not feel empty, but alive, teeming with life in forms both familiar and unexpected. The first year marks a transition from initial survival to conscious observation, a period in which the last human begins to truly understand the resilience, adaptability, and subtle intelligence of the natural world. In this stage, the Earth is not simply reclaiming space. it is rewriting the narrative of life itself, demonstrating that even in the absence of humanity, ecosystems continue to function, evolve, and flourish. For the last human, this first year alone would be both challenging and awe-inspiring, a time of adaptation, reflection, and profound connection to the planet's ongoing story. Section 5. Years Alone. The slow collapse of civilization. As months stretch into years, the world of the last human would enter a new phase, one defined by the slow yet relentless collapse of human civilization. Structures that once symbolized permanence, skyscrapers, bridges, highways, and dams, would begin to reveal the limits of human engineering. At the same time, nature would steadily reclaim these spaces, transforming them into landscapes of quiet, patient regeneration. For the last human, these years would be both a test of resilience and a profound opportunity for observation, reflection, and adaptation. The first noticeable changes would occur in buildings. Without maintenance, roofs would collapse under snow, rain, or accumulated debris. Wooden structures would rot, steel frameworks would corrode, and concrete would crack under thermal expansion and frost. Windows would shatter due to wind pressure, hail, or temperature fluctuations, providing entry points for birds, squirrels, and other animals. Even monumental structures, museums, stadiums, or office towers would slowly succumb to the elements, demonstrating that human-made materials, while engineered for strength, cannot withstand the patient forces of nature indefinitely. Urban landscapes would transform at an accelerating pace. Streets would fracture as tree roots pry apart asphalt, and sidewalks would become carpets of moss and grass. Abandoned vehicles would rust and collapse, their interiors becoming miniature habitats for insects or small mammals. Parks would expand as fences deteriorate and gardens spill into surrounding streets. Nature, unbound by human schedules, would begin to operate according to its own rhythms, and the last human would have front-row access to an astonishing display of ecological succession. Water systems would experience both decline and transformation. Reservoirs and aqueducts would lose functionality, and water infrastructure would fail as pumps and filtration systems break down. Stormwater, rain, and rivers would define the availability of drinking and irrigation water, creating dynamic environments of temporary ponds, wetlands, and seasonal flooding. Submerged streets and basements could become breeding grounds for amphibians, fish, and insects, while eroded banks allow rivers to reclaim their natural courses. The last human would need to adapt constantly, understanding not just survival techniques, but also the broader hydrological changes reshaping the planet. Transportation infrastructure would degrade as well. Bridges and tunnels would deteriorate, roads would buckle, and railways would corrode and warp. Vehicles would be useless after a few years, their tires rotting, batteries dead, and engines inoperable. As the human-made network of connectivity collapses, the last human would rely increasingly on walking, swimming, or improvising small watercraft to navigate landscapes once dominated by cars, buses, and trains. In doing so, They would develop an intimate understanding of the land's natural contours and obstacles, knowledge that no map or GPS could fully convey. Wildlife would continue to expand into these newly available territories. Deer, wolves, and other larger mammals would reclaim open spaces and forests, while birds and insects would fill niches left empty by human absence. Predators and prey would establish natural balances, creating complex ecosystems within and around abandoned cities. The last human could witness these interactions up close, observing hunting behaviors, nesting rituals, and territorial disputes that had long been hidden by human interference. Even small creatures, ants, rodents, and microorganisms, would play vital roles in reshaping soils, decomposing debris, and establishing habitats for larger species. Over these years, climate and weather would subtly reflect the absence of human influence. Air pollution would drop dramatically. Skies would become clearer, and precipitation patterns could shift as urban heat islands dissipate. Forests, grasslands, and wetlands would absorb carbon dioxide, helping mitigate warming trends locally. While these effects would not reverse global climate change entirely, they would offer the last human a tangible sense of Earth's ability to restore balance when human pressures are removed. Food acquisition would remain a daily necessity, but the challenge would grow more complex. Urban foraging might provide berries, nuts, and edible plants, while small-scale hunting could supplement protein needs. Seasonal changes would dictate what is available and when, requiring careful planning, observation, and patience. Foraging would also teach the last human to understand plant cycles, animal behaviors, and the subtle interconnections between species, all essential knowledge for survival in a world reclaimed by nature. Mental and emotional adaptation would continue to evolve. The initial shock of solitude would give way to a quieter acceptance of existence without other humans. Creativity, observation, and routine would take on new importance. Journals, sketches, and mental exercises could provide companionship and cognitive stimulation, while relationships with animals, both wild and domesticated, would offer emotional support. The last human would begin to perceive the world not just as a deserted environment, but as an interconnected, living system, with each plant, animal, and weather pattern playing a meaningful role. Over time, cultural artifacts, books, art, buildings, and monuments would deteriorate, blending into the surrounding environment. Paper would rot, metals would corrode, and plastics would fragment into micro-debris, creating slow but inevitable changes to the urban landscape. While these objects might have once represented human achievement, their decay would provide insight into the impermanence of civilization and the enduring power of natural processes. For the last human, observing these changes would cultivate both humility and a profound sense of awe. Finally, these years would offer an unprecedented opportunity for reflection on humanity's place in the natural world. The slow collapse of civilization would serve as a lesson in the impermanence of human structures and the resilience of ecological systems. The last human would witness Earth operating on its own terms, responding to forces of growth, decay, and renewal without intervention. Cities, roads, and buildings would gradually become part of the landscape, integrated into a larger system of life, rather than dominating it. In this stage, survival becomes a fusion of practical skill and mindful observation. The last human would no longer merely endure. They would witness a remarkable process of planetary restoration. Life, resilient and adaptive, continues despite the absence of human presence, illustrating both the fragility and persistence of ecosystems. Years alone are a period of learning, adaptation, and awe, a time to observe the quiet, patient rhythms of the world that hum along beneath the surface of human absence. Section 6. Decades alone, cities turn to forests. As decades pass, the world of the last human would shift from a state of gradual decay to one of profound transformation. Cities that once symbolized human dominance would slowly dissolve into living forests. Streets would vanish beneath layers of soil, roots, and fallen leaves. Buildings would crumble into skeletal remains wrapped in ivy and moss. Over time, the planet would reclaim its spaces with a quiet persistence, demonstrating the remarkable resilience of nature when humans are no longer present to maintain, alter, or destroy it. The physical changes in urban landscapes would be striking. Pavement, roads, and sidewalks, long cracked by frost and roots, would be completely overgrown with grasses, shrubs, and saplings. Streets and plazas would transform into green corridors, linking parks, gardens, and forests in an unbroken network of vegetation. Even in the densest cities, skyscrapers would succumb to decay. Concrete would crack, steel beams would corrode, and once pristine facades would be hidden beneath creeping vines. Roofs would collapse, allowing sunlight and rain to penetrate interior spaces, giving plants and small trees the chance to grow inside buildings. What was once a city would become an urban forest, a complex, interwoven habitat teeming with life. Animal populations would evolve in parallel with vegetation. Without humans to hunt, harass, or fragment their habitats, wildlife would flourish. Birds would dominate the vertical spaces of former high-rises, nesting on ledges, within rafters, and inside elevator shafts. Squirrels, raccoons, foxes, and deer would roam freely through streets once congested with traffic. Predators, from wolves to mountain lions in some regions, might venture further into what were once urban centers, creating natural predator-prey dynamics. Over decades, ecosystems would begin to stabilize, with flora and fauna finding a balance in the new urban wilderness. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands would also continue to reshape themselves. Urban water infrastructure would have long failed, allowing rivers to reclaim natural channels. Floodplains would expand, creating marshes and ponds where streets and buildings once dominated. Seasonal floods would distribute nutrients and create microhabitats for amphibians, fish, and insects. These water systems would act as lifelines for new ecosystems, supporting an astonishing variety of species. The last human would witness firsthand how water, long controlled and diverted by human engineering, regains its natural influence over the landscape. Soil development would accelerate as organic matter accumulates. Fallen leaves, decomposing wood, and abandoned materials would form rich humus layers, nourishing the growth of trees and shrubs. Seeds carried by wind, water, or animals would take root in cracks in buildings, streets, and sidewalks, establishing new vegetation. Over decades, even the densest urban centers would be transformed by this slow but relentless accumulation of soil and greenery. Humanity's footprint, while once overwhelming, would fade under the quiet, patient work of plants, microbes, and animals. The last human's daily life would be shaped by these ecological transformations. Survival would require keen observation and adaptation. The shifting landscape would offer both opportunities and challenges, new sources of food and water, but also the need to navigate overgrown streets, fallen buildings, and wild animal territories. By this stage, the last human would likely be highly attuned to the natural world, understanding the behaviors of wildlife, the seasonal cycles of plants, and the ways in which landscapes evolve over decades. Every step would carry a sense of presence and connection to the environment. The mental and emotional adaptation of decades alone would be profound. The passage of time would cultivate patience, acceptance, and a deep sense of wonder. The last human would have witnessed the initial collapse of civilization, the resurgence of nature, and now the slow creation of entirely new ecosystems. Solitude, while still poignant, would be complemented by an intimate awareness of life's rhythms. Observing the interplay of species, the cycles of growth and decay, and the quiet reclamation of urban spaces would provide ongoing mental engagement, curiosity, and even a form of companionship in the natural world. The visual transformation of cities into forests would be extraordinary. Streets would be almost invisible beneath moss and undergrowth, and former landmarks would appear as ruins hidden beneath canopies of trees. Vines and flowering plants would climb walls, while birds and small mammals occupy every nook and cranny. The last human would likely perceive this world with awe, a living, breathing city of plants and animals, organized not by human design, but by natural processes. Even remnants of civilization, bridges, statues, street lamps, would become integrated into this vibrant, self-sustaining ecosystem. In these decades, ecological interactions would grow increasingly complex. Pollination, seed dispersal, predation, and nutrient cycling would continue largely uninfluenced by humans. Animals would establish new territories, flora would adapt to urban microclimates, and decomposition would maintain soil fertility. The last human would have a front row seat to the ongoing dance of life, observing systems that operate on scales far beyond human lifetimes. Each season, each storm, and each animal migration would contribute to the intricate web of life that now dominates spaces once controlled by humanity. Over time, natural disturbances would also become evident. Fires, storms, and floods would reshape the environment, opening space for pioneer species, clearing overgrowth, and creating opportunities for regeneration. These events, though potentially disruptive, would accelerate the transition of urban spaces into forests, wetlands, and meadows. The last human would witness cycles of destruction and renewal, understanding that what might initially seem like chaos is, in fact, part of nature's enduring rhythm. By the end of these decades, the last human would live in a world almost unrecognizable from the one they first knew. Civilization would exist only as faint traces, rusted structures, remnants of roads, or crumbling monuments now overrun by vegetation. Nature, in all its diversity and adaptability, would dominate the landscape. The last human would continue to adapt, now fully integrated into this wild, regenerated world. Life would proceed at a rhythm dictated not by human schedules or technology, but by the patient, unyielding cycles of the planet itself. In this stage, the last human's experience would be one of deep observation, profound awe, and sustained survival. They would bear witness to the transformation of human spaces into living forests, an intimate example of the resilience and persistence of nature. Cities, once monuments to human achievement, would evolve into thriving ecosystems, showing that life in all its forms continues when humans are gone. Decades alone would reveal Earth's quiet, relentless power to heal, restore, and reclaim, offering the last human an unparalleled perspective on the beauty and resilience of the natural world. Section 7. Centuries Alone. The planet reclaims civilization. As centuries unfold, the last human would experience a world almost unrecognizable, where nature has fully reclaimed the remnants of human civilization. Cities, once bustling hubs of activity, would be transformed into dense forests, sprawling wetlands, or rolling meadows. Bridges and buildings would collapse entirely, leaving only skeletal remains entwined with vegetation. Even the tallest skyscrapers, with steel frames and reinforced concrete, would succumb to the patient, inexorable forces of weather, erosion, and plant growth. Nature would assert dominance in a process both relentless and quietly beautiful, and the last human would witness Earth reclaiming the spaces that once belonged to humanity. By this stage, the urban landscape would be almost unrecognizable. Streets would be buried under layers of soil, fallen leaves, and plant growth. Pavements and sidewalks would be entirely fractured, overtaken by grass, shrubs, and saplings. The last human would navigate through a jungle of former city streets, with trees stretching skyward where office buildings once towered. Former landmarks would be obscured by moss, vines, and thick undergrowth, their outlines barely visible as nature repurposes human creations into habitats for wildlife. Bridges might collapse entirely, leaving gaps filled with fallen trees or small streams, illustrating the impermanence of human engineering compared to the patience of natural processes. Animal populations would continue to expand and diversify. Birds would nest in every possible nook and cranny, their calls echoing through the forests that were once city streets. Small mammals, from squirrels to rabbits, would thrive, while larger predators like wolves or mountain lions could move freely across what had been heavily populated regions. In some areas, species that were previously endangered might re-establish themselves, recolonizing habitats once fragmented by urban development. The last human, moving quietly through these landscapes, could witness the rich tapestry of predator-prey dynamics, territorial disputes, and interspecies interactions, experiencing ecosystems operating entirely independent of human influence. Water systems would have transformed completely. Dams, canals, and other artificial water control systems would have long failed, allowing rivers and streams to reclaim their natural channels. Floodplains would expand, wetlands would flourish, and seasonal flooding would redistribute nutrients across the landscape. Abandoned reservoirs might become lakes teeming with fish and amphibians, while former streets and parking lots would act as temporary ponds or marshes. The last human would observe the reshaping of hydrological systems, understanding that water, once tightly controlled by human infrastructure, now flows according to the planet's own rhythms. Vegetation would dominate not just the ground, but every available vertical space. Trees, shrubs, vines, and flowering plants would climb and twist around abandoned structures, forming a multi-layered canopy. Fallen debris and rotting wood would create fertile soil, supporting new growth in a self-sustaining cycle. Seasonal changes would be marked by shifts in color, the bloom of flowers, and the shedding of leaves, transforming the environment in a continuous display of renewal. For the last human, this immersive landscape would serve as both home and classroom, providing endless opportunities to observe ecological processes firsthand. The climate would feel different, influenced subtly by the absence of humans. With centuries free of industrial emissions, local air quality would improve dramatically. Forests and wetlands would absorb carbon dioxide, contributing incrementally to climate stabilization. Weather patterns might gradually shift as urban heat islands disappear, creating cooler temperatures and more balanced rainfall. The last human would feel these changes, perhaps noticing longer winters, more predictable seasonal shifts, or cleaner skies, all evidence of Earth's slow recovery in the absence of human interference. Cultural artifacts would continue to deteriorate. Paper, plastics, and textiles would decompose entirely, leaving behind only metals and stone. Even these would show the effects of time, rusted, cracked, and worn, integrated into the natural landscape. Former cities would become mosaics of plant life and decaying human-made materials, with only faint traces of civilization remaining. The last human, observing these remnants, might reflect on the impermanence of human achievements and the enduring power of natural processes, experiencing a sense of humility and wonder at the scale of geological and ecological time. The psychological impact of centuries alone would be profound. By now, the last human's perception of time would be deeply tied to natural cycles rather than human constructs. Seasons, moon phases, and the slow growth of trees and plants would define the passage of years. Routine survival tasks, collecting water, foraging, maintaining shelter, would be integrated with observation of ecological processes, creating a rhythm of life that is both practical and contemplative. Solitude would feel less like loneliness and more like immersion in the planet's ongoing narrative, with every sound, movement, and pattern offering insight into life's resilience. The last human would witness ecological interactions on unprecedented scales, Predators and prey would establish dynamic balances, plant succession would progress unimpeded, and species diversity would stabilize across formerly urban landscapes. Natural disturbances, fires, storms, floods, would continue to reshape ecosystems, creating new opportunities for growth and renewal. Even the smallest organisms, from microbes to insects, would play critical roles in nutrient cycling, soil development, and habitat creation. In this fully naturalized world, every element of the ecosystem would be interconnected, functioning as part of a complex, self-sustaining system. By the end of these centuries, humanity's imprint would be faint but not entirely erased. Ruined structures, faint road grids, and remnants of bridges or dams would remain as echoes of a civilization that once dominated the planet. Yet these echoes would now be secondary to the living systems that envelop them. Forests, wetlands, rivers, and meadows would dominate, illustrating the planet's resilience and capacity for renewal. The last human, moving through this transformed world, would witness an Earth that is thriving, adaptive, and harmonious, a living testament to nature's quiet persistence. In this stage, life for the last human would combine survival, reflection, and awe. Daily existence would revolve around the rhythms of nature, not human schedules. Observation of ecological processes, animal behaviors, and seasonal transformations would provide both practical insight and spiritual nourishment. The last human would bear witness to a remarkable truth. Even in the absence of humanity, the planet endures, evolves, and flourishes, creating ecosystems of extraordinary complexity and beauty. Centuries alone would reveal a world fully reclaimed by nature, where Earth's pulse beats steadily, unbroken by human presence. Section 8. Millennia alone. Nature fully dominates. As millennia pass, the world of the last human, or any future human lineage, if any exist, would be almost entirely unrecognizable. Civilization would vanish entirely, leaving no functional infrastructure and only faint traces of humanity's former presence. Nature, operating on geological timescales, would dominate completely, transforming cities, roads, and monuments into thriving, self-sustaining ecosystems. The last human, or their distant descendants, would witness Earth in a state of equilibrium, a planet where life moves at its own rhythm, shaped by natural forces and ecological balance rather than human intent. By this stage, urban structures would be completely subsumed. Skyscrapers, once monuments to human ingenuity, would collapse fully. Their steel frames would rust and warp. Concrete would crumble into dust, and plant life would blanket every surface. Roads would be indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain, buried beneath layers of soil, roots, and leaf litter. Bridges would have collapsed into rivers or forests, becoming nurseries for vegetation and homes for animals. Even massive monuments, stone statues, pyramids, or dams would be weathered, cracked, and partially overtaken by moss, vines, and small trees. The landscape would appear wild and organic, as if humanity had never existed, a testament to the enduring power of natural processes. Forests would dominate spaces once reserved for human activity. Urban areas would transform into dense, multi-layered ecosystems with towering trees, shrubs, flowering plants, and undergrowth, creating intricate habitats. Rivers and wetlands would reshape the terrain, forming meanders, lakes, and marshes in areas formerly controlled by dams and canals. Coastal cities might be partially submerged or reshaped by erosion and rising sea levels, leaving only natural landforms to guide ecological succession. Mountains, plains, and deserts would operate under the same principles, allowing native flora and fauna to expand without human interference. Wildlife populations would thrive in ways unimaginable during humanity's era. Predator and prey populations would reach natural balances, free from hunting, pollution, or habitat fragmentation. Species that were previously endangered or even extinct could potentially re-emerge through natural recolonization or evolution. Animals would explore new territories, recolonizing areas that had been dominated by humans for centuries. Birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and insects would create interwoven ecological networks, each species contributing to the health and stability of its environment. The last human would observe life in its raw, adaptive, and resilient form, witnessing ecosystems operating on scales of both space and time that surpass human comprehension. Water systems would be transformed on grand scales. Without human control, rivers would reclaim floodplains, reshaping landscapes and distributing nutrients widely. Lakes and wetlands would expand, creating rich habitats for aquatic life and attracting terrestrial species. Seasonal flooding and storms would redistribute sediments, eroding old cities and depositing fertile soil across plains and valleys. Oceans would recover from centuries of pollution, allowing coral reefs, fish populations, and marine ecosystems to flourish. Coastal erosion, tectonic activity, and natural weather patterns would reshape shorelines, while mangroves and wetlands provide natural buffers against environmental change. Geological processes would also become more evident over millennia. Soil formation would deepen, sediment layers would accumulate, and the slow movements of tectonic plates would subtly reshape continents. Erosion, volcanic activity, and earthquakes would alter landscapes, further burying remnants of human activity. Mountains and river systems would continue to evolve, creating new habitats and microclimates. Over such vast timescales, even human-engineered changes to the environment, dams, canals, and quarries, would fade into the background, leaving the planet to follow its natural course. The psychological experience of living in a world so completely reclaimed by nature would be profound. The last human, or any observer present over millennia, would perceive Earth not as a human-centered planet, but as a dynamic, self-regulating system. Time would be measured in seasons, tree rings, the migrations of animals, and the slow decay and regeneration of ecosystems. Survival would be intertwined with observation, patience, and an intimate understanding of ecological relationships. The experience would blend necessity with awe, creating a deep sense of connection to the planet's enduring cycles. Natural disturbances would continue to shape these millennia-long landscapes. Fires sparked by lightning, storms, floods, and volcanic eruptions would alter ecosystems, opening space for new species and reshaping the balance of life. These events, though sometimes destructive, would accelerate ecological succession and promote biodiversity. For the last human, observing the interplay of destruction and renewal would provide insight into the inherent resilience of life, where even catastrophic events are integrated into the long-term functioning of the planet. Cultural artifacts would vanish almost entirely. Paper, plastics, textiles, and wood would have decomposed, leaving only the most durable materials, stone, ceramics, and metals weathered and partially buried. Even these remnants would eventually blend into the landscape, metal oxidizing into rust, stone cracked and covered in moss, ceramics fragmented and hidden in soil. Humanity's physical legacy would be subtle, integrated into Earth's geology and ecology, offering evidence of our brief presence, but no longer dominating the landscape. By the end of millennia, the last human, or their distant descendants, would inhabit a world where life and ecosystems function independently of humanity. Forests, rivers, mountains, and oceans would operate on their own schedules, resilient and adaptive. Humans, if still present, would exist as observers and participants within these ecosystems, no longer controllers of the planet, but part of a broader, self-regulating web of life. The perspective would be one of humility, awe, and profound understanding of Earth's resilience, illustrating the power of natural systems to endure and flourish beyond human influence. In this stage, Earth is no longer a human-centered planet. Civilization has vanished. Cities have returned to forests. Rivers flow freely, and wildlife thrives. The last human would witness a planet that is alive, self-sustaining, and breathtakingly beautiful. A world that continues, evolves, and adapts, regardless of humanity's absence. Millennia alone reveal the enduring truth that life persists, ecosystems regenerate, and the Earth's heartbeat continues, steady and unbroken, long after humanity has faded into memory. Section 9. 10 millennia later, Earth as it would be without humans. 10 millennia after humanity has vanished, or after the last human has fully disappeared, Earth would appear as a planet almost entirely independent of human influence. Cities, roads, and monuments would have vanished into the soil, buried under millennia of geological and ecological processes. The planet would be dominated by fully natural systems, with ecosystems, climate, and geology shaping life at their own pace. Observing this distant future provides a glimpse into the scale of time and the resilience of life, revealing a world that continues in profound beauty and complexity, long after human presence has faded. By this stage, the physical traces of civilization would be largely gone. Stone structures, metals, and concrete remnants would be buried, broken down, or thoroughly weathered. Earthquakes, erosion, and floods would have reshaped landscapes once modified by human engineering. Rivers would follow their natural courses, meandering across valleys, carving new channels and creating wetlands and floodplains. mountains and hills would be sculpted further by wind and rain, while plains and deserts would reflect centuries of sediment deposition and shifting climates. The very shape of continents and landscapes would gradually adjust to the natural processes that have long been masked by human activity. Forests would blanket vast regions, including former cities, towns, and farmland. Old-growth forests would dominate landscapes, creating multi-layered habitats for plants, birds, and mammals. Forest fires, naturally occurring over centuries, would continue to shape species composition and distribution, creating opportunities for pioneer plants and animal populations. Grasslands, savannas, and wetlands would flourish in regions once cleared for agriculture, now returning to their natural states. Even coastal areas, reshaped by erosion, sedimentation, and tidal patterns, would provide rich habitats for marine and terrestrial life. Earth would become a mosaic of biomes, each interacting dynamically with the others. Animal populations would be diverse and well-established. Large predators, herbivores, birds, and insects would have fully adapted to the new ecosystems. Species that were once endangered or driven to extinction by humans might have re-emerged through natural recolonization or evolutionary adaptations. Oceans, previously heavily impacted by fishing, pollution, and climate change, would recover significantly. Coral reefs might flourish, fish populations would rebound, and marine mammals would reclaim habitats previously compromised by human activity. In terrestrial ecosystems, predator-prey balances would have stabilized, creating complex interwoven food webs that operate without interference. Water systems would dominate landscapes in dynamic ways. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands would function fully according to natural processes, with seasonal floods redistributing nutrients, shaping riverbanks, and nourishing forests and grasslands. Former dams, canals, and reservoirs would have collapsed or eroded, leaving little trace of human intervention. Coastal regions would experience natural tides, storms, and sea level changes, with mangroves, salt marshes, and coral reefs buffering the land from erosion. The hydrological cycle, unimpeded by human extraction or pollution, would operate in full, demonstrating Earth's remarkable self-regulating mechanisms. Soil and geological processes would also become prominent over 10 millennia. Organic matter would accumulate to create deep, fertile soils in some regions, while erosion, volcanic activity, and sediment deposition would shape landscapes in others. Mountains would continue to rise slowly through tectonic activity. Rivers would carve valleys, and plains would gradually accumulate sediment from rainfall and erosion. The slow pace of geological time would contrast with the rapid collapse of human-made structures, highlighting the impermanence of human achievements in comparison to Earth's long-term processes. The planet's climate would have adjusted subtly in the absence of human influence. Over thousands of years, the removal of industrial emissions, deforestation, and urban heat islands would allow natural carbon cycles to stabilize locally. Vegetation would sequester carbon in soils and forests, gradually impacting atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Natural climate drivers, solar cycles, ocean currents, volcanic eruptions, would dominate, creating seasons, weather patterns, and climate zones in the way they did before humanity's industrial era. The Earth would exhibit its own rhythm, balanced, dynamic, and resilient. The last human, or anyone observing at this stage, would perceive time differently. Millennia would be measured by the growth of forests, the erosion of mountains, the formation of sediment layers, and the migration patterns of animals. Life would operate at scales far beyond human lifespans, emphasizing patience, adaptation, and observation. Survival would be intimately linked to understanding natural cycles, from the flowering of trees to the rise and fall of rivers. Even without human influence, life would be teeming, dynamic, and adaptive, offering endless wonder and insight into Earth's processes. Ecological succession would dominate every landscape. Forests would mature, wetlands would expand, and deserts would maintain their aridity, all interacting in a complex balance shaped by climate, water availability, and species interactions. Natural disturbances, such as wildfires, landslides, and floods, would continue to shape ecosystems, providing opportunities for renewal and adaptation. Species would move and evolve in response to these conditions, creating a living, breathing Earth that functions independently, self-sustaining, and resilient over millennia. Cultural artifacts, now almost entirely erased, would have only subtle geological traces. Buried foundations, metallic fragments, or mineralized remnants might be detectable for scientists millions of years later, but for all practical purposes, human civilization would be invisible to the living world. Earth would be a planet of forests, rivers, mountains, oceans, and skies, thriving in complex patterns independent of humanity. Life itself would flourish, adaptive and persistent, proving that the biosphere is far more enduring than the civilizations that briefly inhabit it. By the end of 10 millennia, the planet would feel entirely alive, self-regulating, and harmonious. Humans, or their memory, would no longer dictate landscapes, control ecosystems, or shape the climate. Earth would demonstrate an extraordinary capacity to recover, adapt, and flourish over vast scales of time, highlighting the resilience and patience of natural processes. For anyone observing, these 10 millennia would reveal a world transformed, a thriving, dynamic planet where life persists, evolves, and prospers entirely on its own terms. Section 10, 50 millennia later, the Earth's complete renewal. 50 millennia after humanity's disappearance, Earth would be almost unrecognizable to anyone familiar with the human era. The scars of civilization, cities, roads, factories, and monuments would be erased, replaced by landscapes shaped entirely by natural forces and ecological processes. Geological and biological systems would dominate, functioning independently of human influence. Forests would stretch across continents. Rivers and wetlands would reshape valleys and plains, and oceans would teem with life. This era represents the planet's remarkable capacity for renewal, where nature has reclaimed every inch of space, and life thrives without interruption. Urban landscapes would have vanished entirely. Skyscrapers, bridges, and road networks would have collapsed and decomposed, leaving only traces of stone or metal integrated into the soil. What was once a metropolis might now be a dense forest, with towering trees, climbing vines, and thick undergrowth dominating the former streets and plazas. The last remnants of human construction, perhaps foundations buried under meters of soil, would be indistinguishable from natural rock formations. Cities, once symbols of human ambition and permanence, would have returned to the earth, reclaimed by vegetation, wildlife, and the slow, steady processes of erosion and decomposition. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands would have reshaped landscapes dramatically. Without dams, canals, or levees, rivers would follow natural meanders, carving valleys, distributing nutrients, and creating habitats for countless species. Wetlands would expand in former floodplains, providing homes for amphibians, birds, and aquatic plants. Coastal regions would have adjusted to rising and falling sea levels, with beaches, estuaries, and mangroves forming dynamic ecosystems. Oceans, free from industrial interference, would flourish. Coral reefs might regrow extensively, marine species populations would rebound, and migratory patterns of fish, whales, and seabirds would operate naturally, with the rhythms of tides, currents, and seasonal changes guiding life cycles. Forests would dominate continental interiors. Old-growth forests, untouched by human activity, would spread across what were once farmland, suburbs, and urban centers. These forests would host complex, multi-layered ecosystems with a vast array of flora and fauna. Canopies would provide shelter and food for birds, mammals, and insects, while forest floors would teem with fungi, mosses, and microorganisms. Trees would grow where roads once existed, their roots breaking through former asphalt and concrete, integrating human remnants into living, breathing ecosystems. Natural succession would continue uninterrupted, with species migrating, adapting, and evolving in response to environmental conditions. Wildlife would flourish in a world free from humans. Predators, prey, and scavengers would establish balanced populations across forests, grasslands, wetlands, and oceans. Species that had previously been endangered or extinct due to human activity might reemerge, either through natural recolonization or evolutionary adaptation. Animals would inhabit niches that humans once dominated or obstructed. Wolves might roam freely across former cities, whales could thrive in reclaimed oceanic corridors, and birds would nest wherever structures or trees provide shelter. Biodiversity would peak in a world where ecological pressures operate naturally, without human interference. Geological processes would continue shaping the planet on vast timescales. Erosion, sediment deposition, tectonic activity, and volcanic events would slowly reshape landscapes. Mountains would rise and wear down, valleys would deepen, and coastlines would migrate with shifting sea levels. Former lakes and rivers might evolve into entirely new formations, and wind and weather would sculpt deserts, plains, and dunes. The last human, or anyone observing after this immense span of time, would perceive Earth as a living, evolving entity, its rhythms dictated not by civilizations, but by planetary processes. Climate patterns would have stabilized locally and regionally. Without industrial emissions and large-scale deforestation, carbon cycles would operate naturally, balancing greenhouse gases and contributing to a more stable atmosphere. Vegetation would sequester carbon over centuries, moderating temperatures and influencing rainfall patterns. Seasonal changes would be predictable and consistent, with winter, spring, summer, and autumn shaping ecosystems, animal migrations, and plant growth. Earth would breathe as a self-regulating system, displaying resilience, adaptability, and harmony on a scale impossible to achieve under human management. Over 50 millennia, natural disturbances such as fires, storms, floods, and volcanic eruptions would have shaped ecosystems repeatedly. Each disturbance would create opportunities for renewal, providing space for pioneer species, enriching soils, and stimulating evolution. Life would adapt continuously, demonstrating resilience and creativity. Even extreme events, such as earthquakes or meteor impacts, would integrate into the broader ecological system, influencing the direction of evolution and the distribution of species. Earth's resilience would be evident everywhere, from the microcosms of soil life to the vast migrations of megafauna. Human artifacts would be nearly invisible. Most organic materials, wood, paper, textiles, would have decomposed entirely. Plastics might remain in some form, but heavily fragmented and integrated into sediments. Metals and stone might endure slightly longer, but centuries of weathering, rust, and geological processes would render them unrecognizable as products of human activity. The planet itself would have absorbed or obscured nearly all physical evidence of civilization. Humanity's legacy, if it exists at all, would be encoded in subtle geological layers, detectable only to distant future scientists or civilizations millions of years later. The psychological perspective of the last human, if any descendants survived this long, would be shaped by profound solitude and integration with nature. Time would be measured in the growth of forests, the flow of rivers, the cycles of animals, and the slow shaping of landscapes. Survival, if relevant, would be intimately linked with understanding ecological systems and their rhythms. Life would be immersive, intertwined with planetary processes, and experienced on timescales that dwarf individual lifespans. Observation, awareness, and deep connection with the environment would define existence, replacing the structures, hierarchies, and routines of human society. By the end of 50 millennia, Earth would have completed a remarkable renewal. Forests, rivers, mountains, wetlands, and oceans would dominate, fully self-regulating and vibrant. Life would persist in complex webs, ecosystems would flourish, and natural cycles would operate unimpeded. Humanity, once a powerful force shaping the planet, would exist only as faint traces, footprints buried in soil, chemical imprints in sediments, or distant memories recorded in fossilized remnants. Earth would stand as a testament to the resilience, adaptability, and enduring beauty of life itself. In this epoch, the planet is alive, dynamic, and harmonious. Civilization has vanished entirely, leaving space for the biosphere to operate freely. Earth, independent of human influence, demonstrates its ability to recover, adapt, and thrive. 50 millennia later, life continues, vibrant and intricate, revealing the profound truth that while humans may shape the planet for a brief moment, Earth's pulse beats steadily, resiliently, and beautifully, long after humanity has faded from the scene. Section 11. Hundreds of millennia later, life evolves without humans. Hundreds of millennia after humanity's disappearance, the Earth would have entered a period of profound ecological and evolutionary transformation. Without humans, natural selection, adaptation, and ecological processes would continue unimpeded, reshaping life on a planetary scale. Flora and fauna would evolve in response to new environmental conditions, creating species and ecosystems that may be entirely unrecognizable to anyone from the human era. For the last human or any distant observer, the world would be a testament to nature's creativity, resilience, and relentless forward motion. The physical landscape would continue to shift dramatically over these time scales. Mountains, plains, and coastlines would evolve through geological processes such as erosion, tectonic shifts, and sediment deposition. Rivers would carve new valleys, seas would retreat or advance with gradual sea level changes, and volcanic activity would reshape local environments. Former urban centers would have vanished completely. Buildings, roads, and bridges would be gone, reduced to minerals and rocks assimilated into soils or washed away entirely. Earth's surface would be dominated by natural formations, sculpted by wind, water, and the slow power of geological time. Forests, grasslands, deserts, and wetlands would have fully matured into complex, interdependent ecosystems. Old-growth forests would cover the majority of former human habitats, providing multi-layered canopies and rich biodiversity. Grasslands and savannas would support large herbivores, predators, and complex food webs. Wetlands would continue to filter water, provide breeding grounds for countless species, and maintain nutrient cycles. Even deserts seemingly barren would host highly specialized organisms adapted to extreme conditions. Each biome would operate according to natural laws, with species interactions, competition, and adaptation shaping life in intricate patterns. Animal life would evolve dramatically in response to environmental changes over hundreds of millennia. Species would adapt to new ecological niches created by changes in climate, vegetation, and geography. Predators and prey would continue their evolutionary arms races, leading to new adaptations, behaviors, and even physical forms. Birds, mammals, reptiles, and insects would diversify into forms that could be completely unfamiliar to humans. Marine life, particularly, would experience significant evolutionary shifts, with coral reefs, fish, and marine mammals adapting to long-term changes in ocean currents, sea levels, and temperatures. Life on Earth would be dynamic, creative, and continuously innovating in ways independent of human influence. Plant life would also continue to evolve and diversify. Seed dispersal, pollination, and competition for sunlight and resources would drive the emergence of new species. Forests would develop multiple strata, from canopy trees to understory shrubs and ground cover, each hosting unique organisms. Wetlands would cultivate specialized plants capable of thriving in saturated soils. Grasslands would be dominated by fast-growing, resilient species adapted to herbivory and fire. Over hundreds of millennia, evolutionary pressures would result in ecosystems that are highly efficient, diverse, and well-suited to their environments, demonstrating nature's ability to innovate without human guidance. Water systems would remain essential to life, shaping the evolution of organisms and landscapes alike. Rivers, lakes, and oceans would operate according to natural rhythms, forming habitats that support rich biodiversity. Seasonal floods would distribute nutrients across valleys, supporting forests and grasslands. Coastal ecosystems would evolve in response to rising and falling sea levels, with coral reefs, mangroves, and tidal marshes forming dynamic, self-sustaining communities. Life would adapt to these changes, creating specialized species uniquely suited to the availability and behavior of water in each ecosystem. Geological processes would continue to influence life profoundly. Erosion would shape mountains and valleys. Volcanic activity would create fertile soils and new habitats, and earthquakes could alter river courses and reshape landscapes. These slow, persistent forces would create conditions for evolution to proceed, offering opportunities for species to colonize new habitats, diversify, and adapt to changing conditions. Over hundreds of millennia, Earth's surface would bear little resemblance to human-altered landscapes, instead reflecting the patient work of natural processes. Natural selection and ecological pressures would drive innovation in life forms. Species would adapt to climate changes, competition, predation, and resource availability, resulting in new morphologies, behaviors, and survival strategies. Ecosystems would remain dynamic, continually adjusting to shifts in environmental conditions. Extinctions would occur naturally, often opening niches for other species to exploit, while new forms of life emerge. Over long timescales, life on Earth would be highly diverse, with intricate interactions that have evolved independently of humans. The climate would continue to operate according to natural cycles. Without human influence, carbon levels, greenhouse gases, and local weather patterns would stabilize and fluctuate according to natural drivers. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and solar cycles would continue to influence ecosystems, shaping species evolution and habitat distribution. Flora and fauna would adapt to these gradual and sometimes abrupt changes, developing traits suited to the evolving conditions. The planet's systems, geological, hydrological, and biological, would interact seamlessly, maintaining a dynamic equilibrium over millennia. By hundreds of millennia, humanity's traces would be almost entirely gone. Stone ruins might remain deep underground or be heavily eroded. Metals would have oxidized or integrated into soils, and organic materials would have decomposed entirely. Geological records might preserve chemical signatures of human activity, but for living organisms, the planet would be entirely natural. Forests, oceans, mountains, and deserts would dominate, functioning as autonomous ecosystems. Evolution, selection, and ecological balance would define life, illustrating that Earth's story continues long after humanity's chapter has ended. For any surviving observer, though unlikely in such a timescale, the Earth would be a place of immense wonder, filled with intricate ecosystems and life forms that have evolved over hundreds of millennia. Daily life would be defined by adaptation to natural rhythms. Seasonal changes, predator-prey dynamics, and resource availability. The planet would teach lessons in resilience, patience, and interconnectedness, revealing that life endures, flourishes, and evolves even in the absence of the species that once thought itself indispensable. In conclusion, hundreds of millennia alone would offer the last human, or any observer, a vision of Earth operating entirely on natural terms. Life would evolve, ecosystems would thrive, and the planet would pulse with diversity and resilience. Humanity's brief tenure would be a faint memory, absorbed by geological and ecological processes. Nature, persistent and patient, would demonstrate its remarkable ability to flourish independently, providing a humbling and awe-inspiring perspective on the endurance of life and the dynamic beauty of our ever-evolving planet. Section 12. Millions of years later, the Earth without humans. Millions of years after humanity's disappearance, Earth would have evolved into a world entirely divorced from its brief human epoch. Continental drift, volcanic activity, erosion, and climate cycles would have dramatically reshaped the planet. Mountains might rise where none existed, and ancient coastlines would be submerged or shifted entirely. Oceans, rivers, and lakes would have changed course, and forests, grasslands, and deserts would have evolved into new biomes. Life would flourish in forms that are unrecognizable to humans, a testament to the relentless creativity and resilience of evolution. At this scale, any trace of civilization would be virtually erased. Cities, roads, and buildings would have crumbled and decomposed, leaving only the faintest geological traces. Stone monuments might survive in eroded fragments. Metals would have oxidized completely or been buried under layers of sediment, and plastics or other synthetics would have fragmented into microscopic particles. Even the largest achievements of human engineering, skyscrapers, dams, and bridges, would vanish, leaving the planet's surface dominated entirely by natural formations. Earth would present a clean slate, ready for life to evolve in response to long-term environmental pressures. Flora and fauna would continue their evolutionary trajectories, adapting to shifting climates, altered landscapes, and interspecies competition. Forests might dominate areas that were once deserts. Deserts could expand into former grasslands, and wetlands would flourish in newly flooded lowlands. Plant evolution would produce forms with new adaptations for sunlight capture, water retention, and resilience against herbivory or extreme weather. Flowers, trees, shrubs, and grasses would create a complex tapestry of ecosystems, each interacting with its neighbors in dynamic, self-sustaining ways. Animal evolution would be equally remarkable. With millennia of unimpeded natural selection, species would evolve to fill ecological niches in innovative ways. Predators and prey would develop new adaptations, speed, camouflage, intelligence, and social behaviors to survive in increasingly competitive ecosystems. Insects, reptiles, amphibians, and birds would diversify, evolving unique forms suited to their habitats. Marine life, freed from human exploitation and pollution, would evolve spectacularly. Coral reefs might expand and restructure. Fish could adapt to altered currents and temperatures, and marine mammals could explore novel ecological roles. Life would be vibrant, intricate, and adaptive, showcasing evolution's unceasing creativity. Geological activity would continue to shape the Earth over millions of years. Mountain ranges would rise and erode, river valleys would deepen, and volcanoes could create fertile plains while altering local ecosystems. Ocean basins might shift slightly due to tectonic forces, reshaping coastlines and island formations. Sedimentation and erosion would create new soil profiles, influencing plant distribution and ecosystem dynamics. Earth's surface would be a dynamic canvas, illustrating the immense power of geological time compared to the ephemeral human presence. Climate would fluctuate naturally over these timescales, influenced by orbital cycles, solar activity, volcanic eruptions, and ocean currents. Ice ages would come and go, sea levels would rise and fall, and rainfall patterns would shift, forcing ecosystems to adapt continuously. Plants and animals would evolve strategies to survive these changes, whether through migration, dormancy, or mitigation, physiological adaptation, or behavioral modifications. Natural selection would sculpt life to meet the demands of a planet in constant flux, producing species and ecosystems shaped entirely by environmental pressures. The biodiversity of the Earth would likely surpass anything known in the human era. Life forms would evolve in ways unimaginable, exploiting niches that humans never occupied or had long altered. Predators could evolve to hunt with extraordinary efficiency, while prey species might develop remarkable defense mechanisms. Plants could display innovations in reproduction, photosynthesis, and resource acquisition. Microorganisms, critical to nutrient cycling and ecosystem health, would evolve in complex ways, supporting the productivity of surface ecosystems. Life in all its forms would be interconnected and self-regulating, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of ecosystems to adapt and thrive without human influence. By this point, humans would have vanished entirely, leaving no direct impact on living systems. Earth's biosphere would operate on long-term evolutionary and ecological cycles, free from the distortions introduced by human activity. Former human structures would have been absorbed into soils or eroded entirely, and the memory of humanity would exist only in subtle chemical or fossilized signatures detectable by distant future civilizations or intelligent life. While every human activity would dominate the transcendent universe in multiple planets, Earth's biosphere would operate on long-term evolutionary and ecological cycles, free from the distortions introduced by human activity. Former human structures would have been absorbed into soils or eroded entirely, and the memory of humanity would exist only in subtle chemical or fossilized signatures detectable by distant future civilizations. For life itself, the planet would have returned to a natural, self-sustaining equilibrium, operating according to its own rules and rhythms. For any observer or hypothetical descendant species, Earth would be an awe-inspiring landscape of resilience, creativity, and complexity. Ecosystems would pulse with energy and diversity, evolving continually in response to environmental challenges and opportunities. Every tree, river, mountain, and ocean would tell a story of adaptation and persistence. The absence of humans would allow evolutionary processes to proceed uninterrupted, creating a world alive with both visible and hidden activity. A planet deeply intertwined, self-sustaining, and adaptive over geological timescales. In this epoch, the Earth demonstrates a profound truth. Life endures, evolves, and flourishes independently of human influence. Civilizations may rise and fall in mere thousands of years, but evolution and nature operate on scales that dwarf human lifespans and ambitions. The planet's pulse, shaped by geological, ecological, and evolutionary processes, continues steadily. Millions of years after humanity, life on Earth would thrive in forms and patterns that are dynamic, complex, and breathtakingly beautiful. A world entirely shaped by natural laws and the relentless drive of life itself. Section 13. Tens of millions of years later, the Earth becomes alien. Tens of millions of years after humanity has vanished, the Earth would have transformed into a world that is almost unrecognizable, a truly alien planet from the perspective of humans. Continental drift would have shifted land masses significantly, oceans would have carved new basins, and mountain ranges would have risen or eroded beyond recognition. The climate would have changed repeatedly, driven by tectonics, solar cycles, and orbital variations. Life, unshackled from human interference for countless generations, would have evolved in forms entirely unknown to us, reshaping ecosystems and creating habitats that defy imagination. All traces of civilization would have disappeared almost completely. Any remnants of human structures, concrete foundations, metal reinforcements, or stone monuments would have been buried, eroded, or transformed by geological processes. Plastics, once resistant to decay, would have fragmented into microscopic particles, integrated into sediments, or carried into oceans. Even deep geological layers, containing chemical signatures of human activity, would be faint, detectable only by advanced instruments or distant future intelligences. The planet's surface would be dominated entirely by natural formations: mountains, plains, rivers, lakes, and oceans, operating on millions of years timescales. Independent of our brief civilization, flora would have undergone extraordinary evolutionary transformations. Forests, grasslands, and wetlands would no longer resemble ecosystems from the human era. Trees might develop entirely new forms, adapted to prevailing climates, soil types, and competition. Flowering plants could evolve novel mechanisms for reproduction, dispersal, or survival. Wetlands could teem with species of plants evolved to survive in constantly shifting water levels. Deserts and polar regions would host life uniquely adapted to extreme temperatures and limited resources. Life would experiment, diversify, and specialize, revealing the incredible creative power of evolution in the absence of humans. Animal life would similarly evolve in astonishing ways. Predators, herbivores, and omnivores would adapt to new ecological niches, with body structures, behaviors, and survival strategies unlike anything seen in the human era. Insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals would continue to evolve, exploring strategies to survive, reproduce, and thrive in a planet reshaped over millions of years. Oceans would host extraordinary biodiversity, with fish, mammals, and invertebrates evolving in response to shifting currents, temperatures, and habitats. Creatures would fill ecological roles previously unknown, creating ecosystems rich in interaction and complexity. Geological processes would dominate the shaping of landscapes. Continents would drift, colliding or separating, forming new mountains and valleys. Rivers would carve deep canyons, lakes would form and dry repeatedly, and volcanic activity would create fertile soils or reshape coastlines. Oceans would migrate and reshape shorelines, eroding cliffs and depositing sediments that foster the growth of new ecosystems. Erosion, sedimentation, and tectonic activity would integrate human remnants entirely into the natural geological record, leaving no obvious markers of humanity's existence on the surface. Climate would continue its natural cycles, unmediated by human influence. Ice ages, greenhouse periods, and fluctuating sea levels would reshape habitats repeatedly. Species would adapt or migrate to survive these long-term shifts. Seasonal changes, temperature fluctuations, and weather extremes would act as evolutionary drivers, promoting the diversification of life. Plants and animals would continually refine their adaptations, resulting in organisms highly specialized to their environments. The interplay of climate, geology, and ecology would create a dynamic, resilient, and ever-changing planet. The ecosystems of this alien Earth would be interwoven and intricate. Every organism, from the tiniest microorganism to the largest predator, would play a role in maintaining balance. Energy flow, nutrient cycling, and ecological succession would operate on a scale that humans could hardly perceive. Life would evolve novel solutions to challenges of survival, including extreme heat or cold, shifting landscapes, scarce resources, or intense predation. Evolution, in the absence of humans, would proceed unimpeded, allowing life to explore forms and functions that are fundamentally alien from our perspective. For anyone observing this distant future, hypothetical descendants, advanced intelligences, or simply through imagination, Earth would appear breathtakingly alive, yet alien. No trace of human dominance would remain, and even the faintest relics of civilization would be buried under layers of rock and soil. Nature would operate fully on its own terms, demonstrating resilience, adaptability, and an enduring capacity to create complexity. The planet itself would be a living testament to life's persistence, evolving over tens of millions of years into forms that could scarcely be imagined from a human point of view. By this stage, Earth would no longer feel like a planet shaped by humanity. It would be a world of alien beauty, filled with ecosystems, landscapes, and life forms that are the product of millions of years of independent evolution. Humanity's brief tenure would be barely a memory, its artifacts transformed or erased by the patient work of geological and biological processes. Life would continue, vibrant and intricate, revealing the profound truth that while humans shape the world temporarily, Nature persists, adapts, and thrives on timescales far beyond human comprehension. The story of the last human on Earth reminds us that our presence, while significant in the short term, is fleeting in the grand tapestry of time. Over thousands, tens of thousands, and millions of years, Earth will reclaim itself, evolve, and flourish without human intervention. Forests will grow, rivers will carve new paths, mountains will rise and erode, and life will continue to diversify in ways beyond our imagination. Humanity's legacy will fade, leaving the planet to follow its natural rhythms, resilient and ever adaptive. The Earth is a patient and enduring world, and in its silent, persistent beauty, life will always find a way to endure and flourish, long after we are gone.